6 seconds after it began, it was over. No one in the gym spoke. No one stepped forward. The man who had issued the challenge stood still, unharmed, yet unmistakably finished. There were no bruises to study later, no dramatic collapse to replay. Only witnesses, years afterward, would say the same thing. They came to see who was stronger, and left having seen who was finished before the first breath was taken. The gym smelled of old wood and sweat, a lingering combination that spoke of decades of repetition. Mats, scuffed and patched, lined the floor like a muted stage. Mirrors, some fractured at the edges, reflected the quiet rhythm of men and women practicing forms, punches, kicks. Each movement precise, measured, habitual. This was not a place of spectacle. It was a place of expectation. Here, challenges were part of the air, unspoken yet understood. A newcomer might test a teacher, a student might test a peer. Loud claims were common. Demonstrations of skill were rarely subtle. Yet the culture valued efficiency above showmanship. Those who moved too quickly or too forcefully drew attention and often dismissal. Respect was measured in stillness, in control, in the ability to end an encounter before it began. The hierarchy was layered. At the surface there were belts, accolades, and public recognition. Beneath that, there was an unspoken authority that no title could confer. Mastery understood not through words, but through presence. It was this authority that shaped the room's reactions. When someone entered with a reputation, whether whispered about or loudly declared, every eye followed, every pause noted. And in this room that day, two reputations were about to collide. One carried the weight of legend, earned quietly over years. The other, sharp and forceful, demanded attention simply by being present. No one in the room spoke of it. No announcement was made. Yet the anticipation was there, subtle, growing, measured in the slow shifting of feet, the tightening of hands, the clearing of a space without comment. The rules were simple. See, assess, respond. Nothing more. The room itself enforced them, and everyone present, witnesses who would later recount the event, understood that in this gym, the smallest miscalculation, the slightest loss of composure, would be seen and remembered. It was in this quiet, disciplined space that the moment would unfold. 6 seconds later, every expectation, every unspoken rule, would be confirmed. Not through noise, not through spectacle, but through the inevitability of presence. The challenger arrived without fanfare. Tall, broad-shouldered, his presence immediately marked him as someone accustomed to command. Stories had followed him. Victories, decisive, public, often broadcast to the corners of the martial arts world. His style was aggressive, a forward push, a refusal to yield. Confidence radiated, not in words, but in the way he moved, every step precise, every glance deliberate. To the onlookers, he was the type of man who expected a response, and expected it quickly. Bruce Lee, by contrast, required no introduction. His reputation had grown quietly, through demonstration rather than declaration. Students spoke in hushed tones of his speed, his control, the subtlety with which he dismantled challenges that others struggled to understand. He did not seek attention, yet the room recognized it instinctively. Authority emanated from him not because he claimed it, but because he embodied it. Every gesture, every stance, conveyed competence distilled into simplicity. The two men regarded each other. No words were exchanged. The gym itself seemed to hold its breath, an unspoken acknowledgement that what was about to happen was both inevitable and consequential. The crowd sensed the tension, though the tension was not loud. It was quiet, almost imperceptible, threaded through the shifting weight of bodies and the brief, careful glances toward the mats. Witnesses later described a palpable difference. The challenger carried the energy of anticipation, of proof. Bruce Lee carried the energy of certainty, a stillness that suggested he already understood the outcome, long before the first step was taken. There was no boasting, no posturing, only presence. In that measured silence, the dynamics of authority were clear. One man demanded recognition through performance. The other elicited it by existing fully in a mastery that required no demonstration. The gym, accustomed to challenges, recognized immediately that this was not a typical confrontation. It was a quiet test, a public measure of something far more subtle than strength or speed. The air shifted imperceptibly. Students, instructors, onlookers, all aware that something was about to occur, yet uncertain of its form, watched. They would later recall the moment not for any dramatic strike or fall, but for the inevitability that seemed to hang over the space, a calm certainty that needed no explanation. The stage was set. The reputations, so different in expression yet so similar in weight, would meet, and the rules of this quiet, disciplined room would govern the encounter. What began as a private acknowledgement between two men quickly expanded. Students who had been practicing forms stepped back, forming an uneven perimeter around the mats. Observers, initially quiet, became part of the atmosphere without realizing it. The challenge, though still unspoken, was now witnessed, no longer contained in the invisible space of intent. The tension was not loud. There were no shouted demands, no threats or provocations. Instead, it manifested in the subtle cues of human attention. Eyes narrowing, shoulders tensing, hands drifting toward balance rather than strike. The crowd became a silent chorus of expectation. Every head turned, every breath held, was testimony to a collective awareness. This was not ordinary, and it would not end in the usual way. The challenger made the first step forward, small but deliberate. Each motion carried intent, a question asked without words. Bruce Lee responded with no outward motion at all. His body remained calm, minimal, yet the room seemed to bend to his presence. Witnesses later described the effect as almost gravitational. The challenger's energy, forceful and brash, met with an unyielding, almost invisible resistance. No one could have predicted what came next. The gym, accustomed to public demonstrations of skill, recognized immediately that this would not be a contest in the conventional sense. There would be no extended sparring, no prolonged display of power. Instead, a precise, fleeting alignment of skill and timing was about to unfold, so brief that, for most observers, comprehension lagged behind perception. This moment, the shift from private to public, was critical. The challenger could not withdraw. The crowd could not intervene, and Bruce Lee's authority was now observed rather than assumed. The stage was set not through spectacle, but through the inevitability of presence, measured awareness, and quiet mastery. Every observer, consciously or not, understood that what was about to occur would redefine their understanding of control. The seconds stretched, though they were few. The room's collective attention, previously scattered among training routines and small conversations, had converged. Every movement, no matter how slight, became a signal. Every pause became a statement. And in that silence, the challenge, though still without action, had already begun to resolve itself. What happened next lasted no more than 6 seconds. Yet it was felt by everyone present as if time itself had slowed. There were no strikes flung, no shouts or sudden movements. Only the careful, deliberate alignment of bodies, of intention meeting intention. Witnesses later struggled to describe it. Each account varied slightly, yet all conveyed the same impression. Something had ended before it began. The challenger moved first, a slight advance intended to assert control. It was precise, measured, an extension of his reputation, decisive, sharp. Yet Bruce Lee's response was not physical in the conventional sense. His body shifted barely perceptibly, weight transferring, stance adjusting, subtle but absolute. No muscles flexed unnecessarily. No movement was wasted. And yet, in that minimal adjustment, the challenger's forward motion was halted. not by force but by inevitability. Observers would later describe a curious phenomenon. The challenger's confidence wavered instantly. It was not fear in the dramatic sense. It was recognition, the quiet, undeniable understanding that he was engaging with mastery beyond demonstration, that resistance had already been accounted for, and that the space itself now belonged to Bruce Lee. In 6 seconds, the room had registered what many would take years to comprehend. Dominance was not always violent, and mastery did not need proof. The challenger remained standing, uninjured, yet the energy had shifted irrevocably. His stance faltered, his posture relaxed in subtle concession, and those who watched sensed the moment had closed. No one spoke, no one moved. The silence was absolute, yet heavy, weighted with comprehension. Every witness understood that something fundamental had occurred, even if the mechanics remained a mystery. The brevity of the encounter did not diminish its impact. It amplified it, crystallizing the event into something that could be felt more than explained. Bruce Lee's body returned to neutral stance, as though nothing had happened. Yet the gym had changed. The challenger, still present, had become a measure not of skill alone, but of perception, awareness, and the quiet authority that comes from mastery distilled to its purest form. In the stillness of the room, the lesson was already written, though no one spoke it aloud. The aftermath was not loud. There were no falls, no cries of defeat, no dramatic confrontation. Yet the room shifted. Observers later described the challenger's composure as quietly fracturing, an internal recognition rather than an external injury. Every step, every breath, carried the weight of understanding that the encounter had ended before it began. He remained upright, but his certainty had vanished. His movements, once confident and deliberate, became measured, cautious. It was subtle, a hesitation in stance, a delayed response to the rhythm of the room, but unmistakable to those who watched. In martial arts, victory often relies on the body. Here, victory had been claimed by perception alone. Bruce Lee did not strike, did not boast, did not declare dominance. The authority of his mastery was demonstrated in absence, in control, in quiet, unyielding presence. Students and instructors noticed the change immediately. The energy in the room shifted from expectation to observation. The challenger's aura of assertiveness, once palpable, had receded, and in that receding, others glimpsed a pattern of power that required no proof. Silent mastery, psychological precision, and the subtle orchestration of inevitability. Witnesses later recalled the room holding its breath for what felt like minutes, though it had been only seconds. The challenger's internal collapse created a visible quiet around him, as if the space itself had recognized the new hierarchy. There was no gloating, no confrontation, only the unmistakable signal that authority had transferred, without a single overt act of aggression. The moment lingered in memory not for its spectacle, but for its clarity. Mastery had spoken. Recognition had been forced not through action, but through presence. Bruce Lee remained composed, unhurried, as if the entire event were merely a pause in the rhythm of practice. The lesson was absorbed, silently, into the fabric of the room, leaving the gym changed, even when nothing had visibly happened. And when conversation quietly resumed, it was hushed, almost reverent. Students repeated the story to one another not as a tale of triumph, but as a demonstration of control, an illustration of power distilled to its purest form, observed and never needing repetition. Years later, the story persisted, not in headlines or newspapers, but in the careful recollections of those who had been present. Students spoke in whispers, instructors recounted the event during lessons, and even casual observers, when asked, hesitated before describing it. It had become less a tale of victory and more a measure of possibility, an incident that existed simultaneously as memory, cautionary tale, and legend. Bruce Lee himself continued teaching, traveling, demonstrating skill quietly, but the gym where the 6 seconds occurred carried a different air afterward. The mats remained the same, the mirrors still cracked, the scent of wood and sweat unchanged. Yet everyone who returned sensed it. Authority was not a claim, and dominance did not need proof. It lingered in posture, in gaze, in the subtle ways a master moved through space. The event had left its imprint not on flesh or scoreboard, but on perception itself. The challenger's trajectory changed in ways subtle and private. Outwardly, he continued to practice, to compete, to engage in demonstrations, but the memory of that brief, decisive encounter remained. Witnesses noted that he no longer approached challenges with the same overt force. The silence of those 6 seconds had taught him something permanent. Force alone was insufficient. True mastery carried with it inevitability. For the students who observed, and for those who later heard of it secondhand, the story became a framework for understanding skill. It was cited not as a moment to emulate, but as a lens through which to measure intention, perception, and restraint. Every lesson, every practice, carried the echoes of what had happened 6 seconds that crystallized decades of understanding into an almost invisible, yet undeniable, standard. And so the gym became more than a place of physical practice. It became a space where observation mattered as much as action, where patience, quiet assessment, and the subtlest of responses could define outcomes. Bruce Lee's presence, his method, and the outcome of those 6 seconds endured as legend, not because it was violent or spectacular, but because it was inevitable, and because everyone who witnessed it, even in fragments, carried its lesson silently for years to come. The story left no trophies, no plaques, no recordings. Its proof existed only in memory, in the way people moved afterward, in the quiet acknowledgement that sometimes mastery speaks louder than motion, and that some confrontations are resolved not with the body, but with perception and presence. In the stillness of those recollections, the legacy remained, not as a tale of winning, but as a demonstration of control, restraint, and quiet authority. A reminder that the most decisive moments often leave no mark, except in the consciousness of those who recognize them.